Hi everyone, welcome to Doing Sociology. Today we are going to talk about our upcoming series on concepts. In this upcoming series, we plan to engage with sociological concepts that are widely used in the discipline. The idea is to convey the specificity of the social sciences, the distinctiveness of its conceptual tools, and their indispensable role to understand the social. We plan to do so in different ways, and as you will follow this series, you will see that we have essays planned out, and the first essay will be by one of our co-founders, Professor Maitrayee Chaudhuri, who is also with us in this video. Now, to begin the discussion, let's ask Professor Chaudhuri that what does she mean when she says that when you read up basic concepts in sociology, you hoped that it would make things clearer and more certain, but that did not quite happen. As the essay that had already been out, it lays out some of these things, and we are going to understand it better in this video. So, ma'am, if you could talk about it a little.
Yeah, in fact, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. This is one of my favorite, topics, discussing why we study concepts in sociology and why are they so important to understand the social. And the vantage point from where enter this discussion is my early memories as a student. I did not come from a sociology background to the master's program. And those who did come from sociology told me that if I check up a book or a dictionary of basic concepts, I'll be able to follow discussions in classes better and will be able to follow texts better. I tried to do that, but it got more and more confusing. And this is a kind of issue which plagued me right through. And there were various different kind of explanation for this. One explanation was that sociology is not an exact science, and sociology lags behind because it does not have certain and definite definitions of any concept. So if Weber says status is this, Durkheim may say status is something else. Now, this ambiguity or this contestation is often seen as a weakness of the discipline. And the assumption is that if we neatened it up, if we sorted it out, and we had very clear, precise, and certain fixed definitions, things would become clearer. The problem, however, arises that this understanding, as I would sort of assert today, is erroneous because society itself is contentious. There are different views and visions about what the social is. Like gender or race or ethnicity, people who occupy privileged positions may see the world very differently from those who may be in the margins. Now, this is not a weakness of the discipline. This is the very nature of the discipline, that you are negotiating with something which is fundamentally different from the physical world. So at one point, in fact, people would begin with what was called the unity of the scientific method and having distinctions that how is social science different from natural science. That debate is not irrelevant even today. In fact, no debates in social sciences are irrelevant. They acquire new kinds of focuses, new issues, new interventions, but the issues remain persistent and consistent. And any attempt to brush aside these contentions, in fact, goes against the very grain of sociology. So when I try to say that reading up concepts should make it easier does not happen because concepts are then seen as discrete, separate entities, So you have anomie and you say anomie is defined this way, or you have alienation is defined this way. What we are missing is what is the relationship between anomie and alienation? Why did these terms and concepts emerge in the history of sociology? Why do that Durkheim or a Marx or a Weber be concerned with these issues? However, they look differently. So I think my own position is that it's not a great idea to begin with concepts as discrete entities. But what is important is to locate concepts in the social that they arise, as at the same time appreciating their abstract analytical entity. So it's double-edged. Human beings living in particular periods of society create these concepts, negotiate, so there is a social story to them. But at the same time, they can't be reduced to the social, in the sense it's not a kind of mechanical manifestation of a person or history, but it has analytical possibilities which allows others to look at it. This double-edged nature of concepts, I think, is something we really need to address, instead of saying, let's get A, B, C, D concepts ready, and once we have A, B, C, D ready, we'll be able to understand society.
You refer to the classical sociological thinkers such as Marx and Durkheim and their methodological concerns with the pervasive presence of conceptions, presuppositions, and even common sense ideas. Why do you think engaging with this is important for a sociological perspective? And what do you mean by saying that concepts are not external to us and human beings are concept-bearing entities?
Yeah, thank you, Dipali, because I think you've really sort of, got the point that I was trying to argue. Not external. That is, you can't learn the definition of alienation and understand alienation because you've got the definition right. Because getting the definition right is fundamentally different from understanding it as a concept which will help you to understand the mechanisms of society, So I think the reason I talk about preconceptions, and in the essay I mentioned the conception and assumption, is that unlike the physical sciences, or even in some senses like the physical sciences, we already have ideas about the physical world. We have ideas about the social world. So all of us would hang clothes, in the part of the balcony or the yard where the sun rises in the east and the sun comes. So we have practical action, which is determined by the conceptions that we have, the practical sense that we have about the world. Look, the sun rises here, the sun never comes from the north, so we don't hang our clothes there. So common sense assumptions are central to us because we are concept-bearing, thinking, reflecting people. But at the same time, these conceptions are not invalid or wrong, but they're partial. They're partial. They are partly right and partly wrong. Partly right because they guide us to be in our practical life, but not correct in terms of understanding the nature of the social, the inequalities, the diversities there. For example, if the mother tells the daughter that come home early, it's not safe for you to come late, it's not an erroneous advice. She's being practical. Her common sense, her experiential sense tells her it's better to. But what it does not tell her is why should the streets be unsafe for girls? It doesn't ask the more fundamental question about the public spaces for gender. So the nature of common sense or presupposition is very tricky. Sorry. That when we study the social, even as sociologists, these presuppositions persist in our minds. We can't get rid of them. So very often people will say, oh, we must be very objective and we must keep away these ideas. There's no way we can keep away these ideas. And my argument is that concepts and theories are actually the tools by which we negotiate and challenge these ideas. So when we say, so-and-so is from very high status in common sense language, we are assuming that status means high status. When we do, it changes totally. We would define what status is. And we would see the relational relationship between one status and the other. So the nature of social science concepts are totally different. And the reason Durkheim or Marx said, let's begin not with the ideas that we have of society, but let's formulate our theoretical way of entering, however differently Durkheim did from Marx, they agreed on that point. And most sociology and social science would agree upon that point. The problem, however, arises that very often we don't explicate that. When we go to a classroom, we say we must know concepts, but we don't ask why. And therefore, my entry point of common sense knowledge, sociological knowledge, knowledge by acquaintance, and knowledge about.
Oh, ma'am, can you also speak a bit on the distinction between knowledge by acquaintance and knowledge about? Why should we engage with these distinctions at the first place? Because if our concern is to understand concepts, then how does this make sense? And what is the connection with neutrality and objectivity?
And they're two loaded questions, but I think a lot of the syllabus, Delhi University, for example, and I remember NCRT or the UPSC, they do have a section on common sense knowledge and sociological knowledge. They also have the sociological perspective, which is, I think, a response of the discipline to the tricky part of a basic concept. It's different from a basic concept because you're saying, look, the sociological perspective approaches the study of the social in this fashion and then understands concept in those category. So negotiating knowledge by acquaintance is so important because the point that I write, that we are concept-bearing people. And the point that Durkheim writes so beautifully in the Rules of Sociological Method, that we didn't wait for sociology to arrive to have ideas about religion or nationalism or family or, gender, whatever. We grew up learning about it. We grew up with proverbs, kahawats, idioms, stereotypes, prejudices. It's part and parcel of who we are. It's constitutive of the social. It is, the language is itself very often embedded with these kind of common sense presuppositions. Unlike the natural sciences like chemistry, keep giving the example of H2O to refer to water, we don't have that kind of abstracted terminology. We use the same words: family, family, religion, religion, marriage, marriage, kinship, gender. The words are the same as we use it in our everyday life and in sociology. It becomes therefore very tricky to say, how is my definition or the sociological definition of the family different from our everyday? Now, if you take the idea of presuppositions or idealist perspective of Marx or Durkheim's presupposition, the moment you say family, we cannot strip the idea of family from the ideas we hold of the family. So we have the picture which I use, you have the father, you have the mother, you have the two children, very often representing middle-class urban families. We have very often, even in sociology books, saying the Indian family is unique. It is defined by certain characteristics of care and concern, etc. You eulogize the idea of a family in even our sociological textbooks. Instead of saying that, look, family is, the whole idea of being relationship by affines or consanguines, there's a certain kind of attempt to define it independent of the ideas that we may have of the family. So you could have, multiple spouses, or you may not have multiple spouses, whatever be it, the family can't be defined with the idea that we hold of the family. So it becomes very, very important to negotiate with that. Pedagogically, we often don't do it. Therefore, I refer here to the banking, mode of education. So you go to a class and you say, look, families A, B, C, D, E, which is like giving them information which has to be then registered and then reproduced. Instead of saying, what is your family like? Is everybody's family the same? What is your grandfather like? Or what is your grandmother like? Is your grandmother like your friend's grandmother? And if they are not, then immediately you start seeing families as differentiated units depending upon your class, caste, ethnic locations. The nature of the family changes, but we don't do that engagement in classes. And we want, increasingly in contemporary times, the whole idea is everything can be resolved by technology. And you don't want any messiness. Messiness is seen as something which is, upsets transmission of knowledge. But society is messy. It can't be neatened up. And therefore my, grave doubts about the MCQ system, where you have one answer, one right, one wrong, because how do you communicate the messiness of the social in that fashion? And yet there is this assumption that we can clean it up by just keeping out all the tricky things. But the tricky thing is part of the social. So supposing you have a domestic abuse, violence in the family, and you say, oh, we can't tell our children that in textbooks, but the children may be facing it in their everyday life. So when you discuss it, you're not attributing any evil motive to the A parent or B. But what you're doing is making them realize that this is part of the social which impacts different kinds of people. In fact, it leads to greater clarity, solidarity, and a sense that I'm not a victim because I'm unique. But there is a pattern which has its own pedagogic merit, But where is the time to do that? And also the assumption that people won't understand. People do understand. There's a curious elitism in the idea that people are dumb by saying that, people won't understand. People won't understand is then the students are dumb, not that we as teachers may be failing to communicate to them. And therefore the importance of the classroom, the dialogic method, the emphasis that all questions are important because they enlightens you, So concepts shouldn't be boxes to be ticked. Concepts are like headlights. They light up a certain thing. So if you have a concept like a family and they light up a particular kind of family, and you realize, okay, this concept has a problem because it is putting off the light from other kinds of families. So just as when you put on a torch, it shines on a particular part and the other part is dark. So you see tools then as lenses, not as fixed definitions, and concepts have to be seen as lens, an analytical lens to see the social. And therefore, what the question you're asking about why we must negotiate with knowledge by acquaintance, knowledge which we get from our fathers, mothers, family, neighbors, peer, is because it's in that process of dialogue that you understand the specificity of sociological concepts. The other point you talked about neutrality and objectivity. Neutrality and objectivity are not abstract concepts that, look, we are being objective. Objectivity is a method. Whole Weber's objectivity in social sciences is to tell you that you are putting forward a kind of approach, which is the whole idea of certain sense of validation, evidence-based, logical procedure by saying, look, this is what we have found. It doesn't mean that this is the truth forever. There can be further inquiry which will show that, look, this wasn't. So the idea of objectivity is not fixed forever, but it is a goal that our theories and methods strive for. And in the debate and the contestation, we reach nearer what is approximate to be the objective. So objective doesn't mean, which is very often today in media discourses, that we are not on this side, we are not on that side. That's an absurd kind of position to say, because facts are facts. They can be socially constituted, historically specific, but there is a method by which we can move towards finding out the truth. That's what journalists were supposed to find out. That, look, this is evidence-based, this can be validated, this can be invalidated. And even into the interpretative method is not something so far removed from it. So Weber, who is known for his interpretative method, was using what would be a causal analysis when he was talking about the Protestant ethic and the rise of capitalism. He was doing historical sociology. But when he was talking about the meaning attributed by the actor to the action, that meaning is socially constituted. That meaning is not random. And therefore, it's important to engage with these concepts in a more serious fashion, rather than do it what we often do these days as illustrative evidence. Look, this is this, to show, to demonstrate. So give examples of hybridity and you show hybridity. Give examples of fusion music and you say this is fusion. Give examples of a person belonging to a particular gender or ethnicity and saying this is intersectionality. Intersectionality is far more complicated. And you have to again locate it. Why did it arise? Why was it articulated by a Black feminist whose argument was that Crenshaw's, that the Black movement, did not address the issue of Black women. And the feminist movement did not address the issue of Black women. So what happened was that the phenomena, the experience of Black women got missed out. And therefore, you have to engage with the intersectional perspective, which looks at these gaps. It's not a claim for attitude or identity, which it has often now been associated with. So therefore, my emphasis on the history of concepts. I don't know about the neutrality part, but the neutrality part is very, very tricky because Weber says that the sociologist cannot be neutral, like the doctor can't be neutral. The doctor diagnoses what is ailing a patient. The prescription could be different. So you could have a very different prescription by a secular democratic state from the prescription of a majoritarian state of how you're going to deal with issues of religious identities, So the prescription is not coming from the social scientists. That is coming from the politics of a particular institution or apparatus.
Finally, what I'd like to ask you is, how do you suggest one could maybe apply a concept to an area of investigation? Because often we notice if you are researching on a particular area, there might be a lot of concepts we feel we could make use of, we could apply. Then how do we say arrive at one or two particular concepts?
Yeah, this is a very tricky and a challenging kind of question. What happens very often, my own approach is that don't be in a rush to apply. Because when you say apply a concept, then you're missing the step I'm trying to emphasize, which is the nature of the concept. If you can only apply saying, okay, let me apply intersectionality, then you're assuming that the intersectionality is a fixed concept. Whereas if you engage with the theory and the complexities involved in intersectionality, then probably you will start applying it also very differently. Secondly, there is a relationship between theory and concepts. Now, there's one very widely held presupposition stemming from a particular theoretical tradition that, concepts are building blocks. So you have one concept, two concepts, three concepts, and they all tie together and they build a theory. This could also be turned upside down, saying that concepts emerge from theory. So your theoretical framework will decide how you use a concept, completely. And I've given the example in this essay, say, division of labor. So division of labor in the functionalist framework would almost stem from a presupposition about the internal dynamics of the societal needs, which then lead to this kind of differentiation, and then you function. So you have a concept which emerges of division of labor, which emerges from a presupposition of how you understand the social. Likewise, if Marx says the division of labor, division of property is the other name for division of labor. So if the division of labor can only be understood by division of property, then the division of labor concept is coming from a completely different theoretical framework. So I'm very, very wary about applying concepts. I would be much more comfortable with applying theoretical frameworks. And I'm quite happy that you can have multiple kind of approaches which can be used. And since my favorite reference point these days is Dorothy Smith, she brings in from Marx relations of ruling, social formations, and uses ethnomethodological understanding of the everyday. Two very different kind of theoretical frameworks to understand feminism. But it's not a concept to be applied. So I think if you see concepts as separate and disembedded from theory, then there is a problem. It's like saying, let me apply status. Then you say, which one? Which frame of reference will you use? So I think it's important to first understand the concept in the framework in which it has emerged, and then talk about it. But the contemporary period is very different, and I'm sort of a little wary about this kind of application of concepts, where you feel they're ready-made consumables. You can take it and you can apply it. Whereas if you have a more broader frame, then you will say, okay, I want to study maybe Jharkhand, say in your own work, where you say, how will you understand it without understanding the history of colonialism and its impact on that region? Or what did mines mean, or the forest means, or the laws mean? Which means that you are going to borrow from historical sociology. So I think concepts in their theoretical framework becomes very important way of entering the discussion. Yeah.
Thank you
I think
so
I
much.
was missing my classroom.
Yes, ma'am. It's just been wonderful listening to you, and I think this is a wonderful introduction to our concept series. So to our viewers, do subscribe to our channel and look out for all the interesting pieces that are going to come up in the series. And thank you again, ma'am. Despite just recovering from COVID, you've spent time talking to us today. So thank you once again.
Thank you.